This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, hello, this is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome once again to the Spirit and Wellness Show. Well, at least I hope it's once again. I always look forward to return visitors, but always like to welcome new listeners to the show as well. As the show continues to grow, and I hope that it will, and I hope to be able to do more with the show as it grows and develops. But as it does, I'm gratified to hear from listeners, hear from people that maybe agree or disagree with some of the things I talk about on the show, but for whom it has stimulated some thought. And that's a good thing, I believe. Yes, so this is the show where we take a look at the days and the week's events, happenings in the world of politics, in the world of science and technology, in entertainment. We look at it all, everything that we are interacting with in our world, and we take a look at it from a higher perspective. We take a step back. We look at the stories that we are telling about ourselves through these situations, and we go within, particularly if it's something disturbing, if it's something that pushes your buttons, which, believe me, the news media are brilliant at doing. They know how to do that. They know how to find the things that push your buttons. And while that may seem like a turnoff, it can be actually quite a blessing, because that makes you or encourages you to confront those things that push your buttons. Now, the key to that is, of course, understanding that your buttons are being pushed and being able to take that step back and rewire those buttons. But it gives you the opportunity to go within those things that are causing you distress, take the energy from them, and use that to recognize the truth of who and what you are. We are, which is oneness, which is connectedness. I like to use the term divine mind. Some will call this aspect God. Some will call it Allah. Some may just call it transcendence. All kinds of terms for it. But my basic belief system here, just so that you know, and you understand that this isn't a religious program per se, though we do talk about religion. It is a show about a spiritual perspective, the idea that we exist at least two levels. That's just to simplify it. But, of course, the one level is the everyday level of our consciousness, and it's an interesting term, consciousness. You might want to think of it as a lower level of consciousness, because at this level of consciousness, we're not really that conscious of what's actually going on. But I'll get to that in a minute. But your everyday, ordinary life, what you're aware of, where you work, your family, your friends, all of those regular, everyday, ordinary things. And in that everyday, ordinary life, we look at the things that are happening, and we wonder sometimes, if they're puzzling things, how they happen. And we look at things like the people in our lives, and the relationships in our lives, and the occurrences that we read about or see on TV, and we wonder how they happened. They are like things that are happening to us. At least that's what, at that level of consciousness, we're dealing with. The higher level of us, the higher part of us, the part of us that is, as I've said, divine mind, that's the part that understands that we are creating it all. We are writing ourselves. And when we become more aware of that, we can actually become more conscious of what we are writing. We're writing the world, actually. And so these things that we encounter through the media, through, newspapers and the internet and however else we begin to see our world, these give us that extraordinary opportunity to discover what it is that we created, why we created it, and what it tells us about ourselves. So that's the impetus behind a lot of what I say and do on the show, besides just giving some interesting perspectives on things and some yoga tips and some wellness ideas as well. So I hope that if you haven't heard the show before, you'll enjoy and come back. So today's show, we're going to talk about breakthroughs in psi research. In other words, research on psychic ability and intuition. There's been amazing body of research done in this area, and has been since the mid-70s. And the findings are extraordinary, and yet, when we talk about it in traditional scientific communities, the blinders come down. Nobody wants to know this. Nobody wants to see this. Nobody wants to hear how this is validated. It's so strange, but it's as if maybe we're just not ready for it. Because if we were to, or if mainstream society were to really accept what is scientifically proven about what we can do and what our abilities are, it would change everything. And I think that may be it. I think I mentioned before, again, the old story that people tell about Columbus's ships. And sometimes the story is attributed to Magellan's ships. I don't know. I don't know if they are. I don't even know if it actually happened, but it's an interesting story. The story goes that when the ships appeared in by the shore where a Native American tribe was going about their business, fishing and all of the other things that they do, the ships were not even noticed. The Native Americans didn't know that the ships were there, couldn't see them, because they were so far beyond what their understanding of what they might encounter in reality is, that for them, the ships were invisible. They couldn't see them, even though they were sitting right there in the harbor. And that, I think, is a lot to say about our mainstream society's view of things like psychic ability. We're quite comfortable with them in science fiction films and books and movies. We line up to see those things. But if you start talking about it like it's actually real and happening and part of who we are, you get tuned out. Sometimes you get laughed at. And why? Because the scientific evidence is right there. So we're going to talk more about that. And we're going to maybe, as I said, maybe get a new yoga pose a pose for relaxation if we have some time. But as you may have noticed, if you noticed the title of today's episode, which is Violence as Love, we're going to talk about violence. And we talked about that last week in relationship to the stories that were coming out about the whole ISIS terrorism, really call to war, the beating of the drums for that particular situation. And it's interesting, there just wasn't time to get to it, but these things are very interconnected. So this episode, we're going to talk about what has been happening with the NFL and this tsunami of abusers and violence that has just seems to have just started to pour out of every corner now. Just to recap, I guess it started with this gentleman by the name of Ray Rice, an NFL player who basically punched his girlfriend into unconsciousness. She subsequently married him and dragged her out of an elevator. And all of the things that have attended this story. It's on video. And apparently Roger Goodell, who is the head of the NFL, claims that he didn't know that video existed. Then there are claims by the police department who got involved in the incident that months ago they had sent this video. So the basic understanding is, as it seems to be, is that the NFL's been covering this up. And that now all of the information is coming to light. Ray Rice has no longer got an NFL career. And, however, he still has a wife, which is a little disturbing. But anyway, then there's another player by the name of Adrian Peterson, who apparently took a switch to his 4-year-old son, beat him till he was bleeding about the legs and buttocks because he wouldn't get off of a video game. So we're going to talk about both of those things. You know, and everybody's upset with Roger Goodell and the NFL for, you know, and of course Ray Rice for these horrible incidents of abuse. But to me, here's the point. Okay? When you have a game in which perhaps the main feature in order to win the game is to violently smash into your opponent repeatedly, when that is the main tool you use, when that is the goal of the game, and when the players are trained for this violence, not only trained, when they are rewarded for such violence and rewarded astronomically well, how is it that we don't understand when they can't turn it off? How is it that we don't understand that when you train people for violence, when you worship at the altar of it, when you encourage it, when you look at it as a good thing that gets you something, if only just a visceral pleasure, when that is how we approach violence, how are we surprised that these same people are beating people that they love, using violence to express themselves because they're told that that's what violence is for? They're told violence accomplishes that. Listen, when you use violence in any way, even if it's in a way that you think is justified, and there is no justification for violence, by the way, but even if you do believe it's justified, even if you're using it in a way to protect something you think is in danger, anytime you choose to use violence, you're entering the unknown. Okay, violence is unpredictable no matter how well you think you have it under control. If you're going to war, if you're, planning air strikes to beat back rebels or what have you, and you think you have it all under control, you've got the strategy, you don't. And the reason you don't is that any time that you use violence, it has effects that you don't see, can't predict. But one thing you can know is that it will come back to you in one form or another. So if we're going to train these men and tell them that we love them for their violent abilities, and we love this game where men destroy each other and beat each other up on a gridiron, if we're going to do that, we have no right to be surprised at the blowback that happens. No right at all. That's not to say we don't, take the necessary steps, take the steps that have been happened to prevent further incidents. But we cannot be surprised. We cannot fully blame Ray Rice for being what he is, because we made him what he is. Now, the other thing that's even more amazing to me is this Adrian Peterson story. This is a man who beat a 4-year-old. Okay? And this goes beyond the NFL. This is another look at violence. This is where the title for this episode comes from. Violence as Love. Violence as love. It's been said that this is a Southern thing, that it's a black thing. It certainly is very prevalent in the black community. The idea of taking a switch and beating your child to bring them into some sort of corrective behavior. It is a shame. It's a shame, and it is something that, well, this story brings to light, and hopefully brings some self-examination, because I haven't seen many African Americans within the community willing to stand up and talk against this. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they don't want to criticize their moms or dads, or criticize their community. And the other thing is that somehow, and this is where the abuse really gets insidious, the attitude is, well, you know what? My dad beat me, my mom beat me, I'm okay. But you're not. You're not okay. If you think, if you're left with the idea that violence is a good thing to do to a child to help them learn, you're not okay. Newsflash, you're not okay. If getting beat taught you that beating is an answer to something, you're not okay. Here's what Adrian Peterson's mother had to say. When you whip those you love, it's not about abuse, but love. Now can we just think about the first part of that sentence? When you whip those you love. When you whip those you love. Now, how can anyone say that with a straight face? Whip those you love. Why would you ever whip another human being? Whipping is what they did to slaves, because slaves were thought to be animals and not human, and the only way that you could control them was by whipping them. When you whip those you love. When you whip those you claim to love, that's not love, ma'am. What you're teaching your kid is that violence accomplishes something, that the means to an end is sometimes the use of violence. And if that's what you want to teach your children, then violence is going to be at epidemic proportions. Now, there's evolution in this, area, particularly when it comes to children. And I hope it continues, particularly within the African American community. I'm of African American descent. My mom and dad made clear to me that they were never going to use violence or lift a hand against me. That didn't mean that I didn't get punished if I did something wrong. That didn't mean that I didn't get in trouble if I did something wrong. But one thing I knew is I wasn't going to get hit with something. They never so much as spanked me, or as far as I know, any of my older siblings. And guess what? We turned out okay. Because we have never done it to any of our children, as far as I know. Now, I don't know all of the things that my siblings have done. But as far as I know for me, raising a hand to a child is unthinkable, no matter how angry I might get. All right, so enough said on that. One more news topic to talk about, and then we're going to go in and talk about this psychic research material. So in Scotland, they had a very historic event happen in which they voted whether or not they wanted Scotland. The Scottish people, voted whether or not they wanted their country to remain part of the United Kingdom or whether they wanted their independence. It's a fascinating thing. Fascinating vote. There were strong opinions on both sides. A gentleman by the name of Mr. Salmond was a strong proponent of Scottish independence. And everybody from David Cameron to Bill Clinton were begging the Scottish people not to break away. And in the end, that's the direction they went. They voted to stay. But this is very much in that trend that I told you about that we are going in through now. That we started in 2012 and will continue on till the end of this year and I think into next, where we have these revolutions, these struggles for identity, these desires for change. It's what we're seeing in Ukraine. This tug of war between those that want to stay with Russia and those that want to be part of the European Union. It's that same sort of identity crisis that we're going through. So the Scottish people seem to feel that they're comfortable with being part of the United Kingdom. Now, there are other Scots who are not so comfortable with that, and I don't think that situation is going to go away. I think the reason they stayed was that there wasn't a dramatic enough crisis, although there is, rising unemployment and, financial difficulties for a lot of Scots people. It hasn't reached the point where it's felt that a change is needed. People don't tend to embrace change until they're at their very last, very last moment, till they're pushed to really being desperate. And I don't think the Scots people were desperate enough and I think that's why. But it was fascinating, and they did it without tanks or guns or armed rebels of any kind. They did it by voting. So that's quite commendable. All right, so now it's time to talk about a new study. And it's not really a study. Well, it is a study. It's more of what they call a meta-study, or a meta-analysis. And what a meta-analysis is it takes studies that have been done over a period of years and looks at the results and sees what sort of trend they can find there. In this particular study, this meta-analysis is called Predictive Physiological Anticipation Preceding Seemingly Unpredictable Stimuli. And what it did was to look at 26 different studies that have been done over 30 years, since about 1978. And what these studies showed were that the body and brain have actually a physiological reaction to future events before you're even consciously aware of them. The neural activity of the brain is triggered in response to stimuli before they are even present in linear time. These pre-stimulus responses tells us that we actually have the ability to physically detect unpredictable events before they even manifest in our physical space-time. Fascinating, isn't it? Here's what the report had to say. The reports they examined, and these were reports published between 1978 and 2010, and they used two different types of paradigms. One is randomly ordered presentations of arousing versus neutral stimuli, and the other was guessing tasks with feedback, correct or incorrect. They concluded that to further examine this currently unexplained anticipatory activity, multiple replications arising from different labs using the same methods are necessary. In other words, more research is necessary. That's usually what all researchers come up with. But particularly in this area, there definitely is need for more research, and it has continued on. But this is by no means the first time that this kind of study has come out and showed this amazing material. There was another study that came out really on the heels of this. This study was called Feeling the Future, Experimental Evidence for Anomalous Retroactive Influences on Cognition and Affect. Basically, it looks at a concept they call retrocausation. In other words, that events in the future seem to be influencing events in the past. Subjects were able to guess at future events at levels of accuracy beyond what would be expected by chance. And in other situations, events that took place in the future appeared to influence those in the past, such as one in which rehearsing a list of words enhanced recall of those words, with the twist being that the rehearsal took place after the test of the recall. And that was a study that was published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology from a psychology professor from Cornell University. The other new study that I talked about, that was published in the Frontiers in Psychology journal. And these researchers are from Northwestern University, UC Irvine, and the University of Padova, Italy. So these aren't wild, crazy hippies. These are professional researchers conducting research under scientific method in controlled labs and circumstances that continue to show each time that these phenomena are real. And yet, as I mentioned at the top of the show, how hard a time mainstream society, mainstream science in particular, but mainstream religion too, has in accepting these things. And we're going to talk more about that next week, about how both science and religion come together in trying to negate an understanding of our own super abilities, if you will, like psychic abilities. That's for next week. Until then, have a good one.